She was a Barnstone abolitionist. Abolitionists believe that you ought to end slavery immediately, as opposed to a gradualist who believe that you should gradually end slavery. So she was in favor of terminating immediately. But she was also in favor of a different set of attitudes towards slavery, to revolt. David Walker had been associated with slave insurrections most of his adult life. He knew full well that they were failures. It isn't that they don't contribute to the ending of servitude. It's just that he couldn't win. Slave insurrections rarely, if ever, end the institution of slavery. Part of what happens, even when slaves leave the plantation, their families suffer. You know, you're going to run away north with Harriet Tubman. What's going to happen to your mother and father down there in Mississippi? What's going to happen to your cousins? They're going to be beaten because they're going to see you as contributing to the running away slave. They're going to work you harder to save, to do their labor that you were doing. They're going to make you pick more cotton, not less. They're going to rape you when they were raping your mother and sister before. Now your mother and sister are gone. They're going to rape your cousin. You're leaving people who are going to be harmed when you run away. They're not going to get free because you got free. You're engaged in slave insurrection. Who do you think is going to get hurt when it fails? Who's going to be lynched? Who's going to be maimed and beaten? Because you're trying to terminate a system where the enemy has all the weapons. They've got the guns, they got the knives, and you don't. Unless you're stealing them, trying to hide. Who are your friends? The white abolitionists. What's going to happen to them? They're going to be excluded, terminated. Lydia Child was rejected by feminists. She promoted Indian liberation. She promoted black liberation. She supported women's liberation. Then she was rejected by the white feminists for promoting women of color. She was rejected by other women for promoting too many women. She was rejected by the upper middle class black and free Negro community because she was promoting slave insurrection. It cost her. So David Walker is very familiar with the phenomenon. So I asked myself this question. If I were a pragmatist in 1827 or 1823, would I be an insurrectionist? And the answer to that question was no. Because instrumental reasoning tells me I should maximize the possibility of benefits under circumstances of duress. You don't risk in a way in which you know you're going to lose. When you know the consequences are terminal, that's not a rational choice. That's not a rational. It's not rational to do that. You can't talk about benefits to the whole of humanity because you don't know the consequences of the whole of humanity. You can't predict that. You know, you may be operating in a place where nobody knows what you're doing. You can't guarantee that you're going to be on the front page of the newspaper. Most of these things happen in moonlight and dark. Nobody ever will know what you've done. If I'm going to use instrumental reason then, I've got to use instrumental reason in a way in which it makes some sense to look on past experience. And past experience tells me that most slave revolts fail throughout history. This is not something you do. You don't be an insurrectionist because it's least likely that will succeed. Or even gain significant benefits for those who engaged in that labor. It may gain benefits for somebody else, but not necessarily for those engaged in it. They're likely to be harmed, more than likely to be benefited. David Walker knew this, and so did Lydia Child. So did Marion Stewart. So did Henry David Thoreau. They knew the possibility of likelihood was very, very, very traumatic. They could not have been reasonable consequentialists. My first step in the argument was that the pragmatist reasoning method, the classical pragmatist reasoning method, was ineffective to justify slave insurrection. And prima facie, I think slave insurrections are justified. That is, I cannot find an argument, or at least I didn't find an argument, to justify remaining in self-servitude or being a self-deprecator or allowing yourself to be brutalized, maimed, and terrorized. There's no argument in favor of that. Pragmatists certainly don't favor it. So my first step in argument was to address and attack the reasoning method. Whether or not that reasoning method produced results. The second part of the argument was, look, what kind of virtues are these insurrectionists promoting? And therein I get in a lot of trouble. All right, so I just want you to know right now that I don't mean anything by it too much. You know, I want to take it all back just in case. You know, on the one hand, you have the abolitionists who promote virtues like benevolence, piety, and temperance. And on the other hand, you have these insurrectionists. But the kinds of character traits that they're promoting is the character traits of self-confidence and self-assurance. They're irreverent. They're promoting enmity. They're promoting tenacity. This woman is standing up in front of a crowd where almost no women stand and asking a rhetorical question, why should she here and die? I mean, that's irreverent. That's tenacious. She's demanding that women have the full right of dignity. Why shouldn't we comport ourselves in a dignified fashion and not in a humble fashion and wash your clothes for very little money? We shouldn't do that. That's irreverence, tenaciousness, enmity. So I argue, among other things, these are virtues. Not Socratic virtues, I mind you. Piety and benevolence, kindness and care. Love your neighbor. Walker argues that you should kill the traitor who turns in the slaves to the slave catcher. If you find it betraying runaway slaves, and this person goes to the slave catcher and says, you can find those runaway slaves right over there in that barn, what you should do is kill them. So, whoa, I don't know, Walker, that's kind of rough, man. You know, that's kind of rough. He thinks he's at war. You know? He's arguing for insurrection. Take up arms. Escape if you can. Terminate your transgressor. The same for John Brown. And Henry David Thoreau, he's arguing in favor of John Brown. This guy is like nuts. You know, he's living in the woods. He ain't got no money. Ain't gonna throw him in jail. You know, I mean, what, are you crazy? He's among people who are all in favor of slavery. He's a white guy. I mean, come on. You're not gonna give us so much of a pass with your whiteness. He argues in favor of John Brown's, you know, taking over a federal amnesty and trying to take weapons to overthrow slavery. John Brown is a great man. Are you out of your mind? He's a pacifist. I mean, and he contends that John Brown must have been a transcendentalist, and he was right. He could not have been a realist unless he was delusional and thinking that really gonna work, that you're gonna just take over this armistice and take these weapons up in this mountains in this little small town, and all the slaves in the world are gonna come up and uprise and come save you. And you're gonna use these weapons to overthrow the federal government that's got millions of dollars and thousands of troops. And everybody's gonna realize that slavery is wrong and life is gonna be good. Okay, John. You're right. Okay. This is a good plan, John. Thoreau said he's got to be a transcendentalist. That is, he has to have thought about or conceived of the world in a transcendental fashion. conceived of a world where he imagined it was possible, but not really look at the real consequences, the probabilities, the evaluative consequences, associations, the collaboration, the evidence. If he looked at the evidence, he would have known that you couldn't take over a Federal Reserve military base with arms and hold it for a very long time in the face of one of the largest military complements in the world. And you're just going to take over a little, with some guns in it, gunpowder, and you're going to stand there and wait for what? I mean, and you're going to get away with this in a city, in town that all believe in slavery. And you just going, see, we took over the armistice and we got the guns, and so now you all recognize that slavery is bad? No. This is delusional. So he had a bad plan. No. Frederick Douglass recognized it. John, you know, this is not going to work. I'm getting out of here. Frederick Douglass left town. Smart man. It's not going to work. But Thoreau claims that, you know, he's got to be a transcendentalist, because he has to think in terms of the possibility of a world that does not exist, even if the vast majority of the population is against him. He imagines this world where he thinks that human beings all have to be treated as humans. Well, what does he mean? He means the same thing that Mary Stewart meant. What happens in slavery is that the slave is denied primordial liberties. That is the very characteristic which makes you a person. They are denied. Their children are sold from them as if their children are not someone they love. So natural inclinations for love are treated as irreverent. When the mother holds her child and the child is being taken away from her to be sold in slavery, and she's crying, what is the slave master's doing? Said she's faking it. They are denied their primordial responsibility, emotions, the basic sentiments of care for your family, for your children, for yourself. That's what they're denied. They're denied the right to reasonable return on labor. They deny all forms of dignity, comportment, to see yourself as a worthy person with reverent pride and sense of hope. So that's what they're denying. Primordial emotions, sentiments of humanity. Thoreau's not arguing for equality, economic equality. He's arguing that part of what happens here is that if we are in favor of humanity as such, this cannot be warranted. Walker does a similar move with Christianity. Walker's a deep and abiding Christian. He believes in the God of Christianity. What he believes in also, though, is that his God, as he says, is not a God of division. God didn't separate man along lines of race. That's what's wrong. That's what he can't get to. That's why he says, you know, there is no servitude bad as this. How can this happen in a Christian nation? Whether they've gotten enlightenment, they've received the right religion, they've got the Bible. How can they, in the name of Jesus, separate humanity along the lines of color? He's a racial primitivist. He doesn't believe that there should be a world divided by race. You think there are Negroes in the world, you think there are white in the world, you think there's a whole lot of ethnic groups in the world, but they don't amount to a division by race designed by God. He's incensed because he thinks this is a violation of Christianity. That's why, among other reasons, he's so adamant about it. He's tenacious. There is no argument that can justify this for him. And there is no reason to wait for the gradualist movement, for the eventual ending of slavery. So those are the virtues of insurrectionist ethics. It's all right, under given circumstances, to be tenacious and to think that tenacity is a moral virtue worthy as piety, benevolence, care, love. Why shouldn't it come? Where did you get this list of virtues from anyway? Who made this list up? This seems like a contrived list. where courage stands on one side and tenacity stands on